This is the after-action report for the Eaton and Palisades fire of 2025. It was commissioned by the County of Los Angeles for the McChrystal Group to create what's called an after-action report. Basically, what an after-action report is, in emergency management terms, is this document tells us what it is that went well and what it is that didn't go so well. And you're probably never gonna read this document. That's okay, because it is a long one. It is 200 pages, but you know what? I've read it for you. So that's what after-action reports are done for. They do them in every kind of disaster. So I'm gonna lay out for you the 3 reasons why there was a massive evacuation failure at the 2025 Palisades and Eaton fire, and why it's so important that you have other options. For example, the temporary shelter, the wildfire shelter that we created using only school supplies. Only $100 worth of school supplies, and every one of them was available to anyone in any elementary school classroom. So I'm gonna lay out for you the 3 things. First of all, alert delays. And I'm gonna lay out for you exactly what happened with the alerts and why it is that they systemically failed and why you shouldn't continue to rely on them as absolute authority. The second is organizational weaknesses. And the McChrystal Group found so many elements to organizational weaknesses that organizations were not able to communicate with one another, they weren't able to coordinate well together, and that created some incredible inefficiencies that resulted in some horrible results. And the last, policy weaknesses. And I know policy doesn't sound exciting, it's not exciting, but there are a few things in here that impact how we need to think about these wildfire evacuations. And before I get into these, I want to say to you that the 3 things I am mentioning to you here, I have read these in other reports. I read them in reports on hurricanes in other states. I've read about them in floods in other states. I've read about them all over the place. So this isn't isolated to just Los Angeles, but in this particular disaster, there are some very unique qualities to this that will teach us so much about how we need to operate our own evacuation response. So let's talk about the alert delays. So what happened was the process to confirm and issue an alert notice took between 20 and 30 minutes. While that was faster than the original 60-minute standard, it wasn't enough because it was actually too slow, because the wildfire during the Palisades was whipping around, and as the wind speed kicked up because of the heat gradients, wind was moving much faster, almost hurricane grade winds all the way through the canyons. These alerts were delayed, and specifically, they were delayed for a long time. For example, the first 911 call, the very first 911 call involving these disasters, involving the very, very first fire, came in at 1 a.m. However, 2 hours later, that alert still hadn't gone out. It took them nearly 2.5 hours to get an alert out. That alert delay held people up in evacuations. People were in zones where fire was starting to consume the areas around them, limiting their options. Where they normally would have 2 or 3 different ways out, they only had 1 way out. And so because of these reports, they were holding themselves up and unable to get anywhere. The second was organizational weaknesses. Now, here's the deal. The County of Los Angeles is massive. It has around 10 million people covering all over Southern California. For all those millions of people, for all the wildfire threats, all the earthquake threats, for all those floods, everything that Los Angelinos have to deal with, they had a total of 37 staff members, 37 full-time staff members who were involved in the disaster preparedness for 10 million people. That was a recipe for disaster, because now you had people who didn't know who to talk to, there was a lack of communication, and there weren't enough resources and people to get around and working with various agencies. Now, if you think about the County of Los Angeles, it's very similar to your county as well, in the sense that you have law enforcement, you have EMS, and EMS means ambulances, you have fire, you have all kinds of agencies that are coming in trying to talk to the County of Los Angeles as they are dealing with the disaster. But because they only had so few staff members, they were unable to get that communication. That's a lot of agencies having to deal with very, very few people. But lastly, one of the biggest problems that wouldn't seem like would be that important is actually really critical were policy weaknesses. The biggest policy weakness that they had was there wasn't a single voice, one comprehensive voice talking on behalf of all of these agencies. Now, emergency management agencies, that's their job. That's their role. Their role is to work with all these agencies together and create a single message on a single comprehensive voice. But when you don't have that, then these policy failures will hold up alerts. And that's exactly what happened, which is they held up the alerts because you had so few people from an organizational weakness perspective, and therefore you couldn't put out alerts. It was a cascading effect. I call it the crisis chain because every link in the chain depends on the previous one. And that is the reason why consistently throughout the fires, you had people giving inconsistent messages. One particular example came from the city of Long Beach, which is in southern Los Angeles. It's right at the southern tip of Los Angeles County. And what was going on in Long Beach was they were receiving alerts saying there were fires where they were located at, when in fact, there weren't any fires there at all. In fact, there were actual alerts going out to the wrong people. So even when they did have alerts, they went to the wrong folks. So what happened was people who were in real areas weren't getting the alerts that they needed. In addition, there were people who were receiving alerts, these big old disaster alerts saying, you need to evacuate, you need to go home, you need to evacuate, you need to go somewhere else. And they weren't under threat. So when the real alert came in, when the real alert told them, now it's time to leave, it was the boy who cried wolf. That's what happened. And so suddenly, when they had the alerts correct, now you have an evacuation that is extremely confused because you have a ton of people who are trying to get on the freeway at the exact same time. And you don't have to live in Los Angeles to realize LA has a bit of a traffic problem. And so people got stuck in cars, and there was a real issue with trying to get firefighters into houses and people who had to be rescued. So that's why this temporary structure that we're creating, even out of school supplies, tells you that you can reassert control over the alerts, you can reassert control over the organizational weaknesses, and you can reassert control over the policy weaknesses as well, and retake control of your disasters no matter how messy the rest of this becomes. And check out how we did the challenge on our main channel.